Section 19 of The Three Impostors by Arthur Machen. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 1 of History of the Young Man with Spectacles. From the filthy and obscure lodging, situated, I verily believe, in one of the foulest slums of Clerkenwell, I indite this history of a life which, daily threatened, cannot last for very much longer. Every day, nay, every hour, I know too well, my enemies are drawing their nets closer about me. Even now I am condemned to be a close prisoner in my squalid room, and I know that when I go out I shall go to my destruction. This history, if it chance to fall into good hands, may perhaps be of service in warning young men of the dangers and pitfalls that most surely must accompany any deviation from the ways of rectitude. My name is Joseph Walters. When I came of age, I found myself in possession of a small but sufficient income, and I determined that I would devote my life to scholarship. I do not mean the scholarship of these days. I had no intention of associating myself with men whose lives are spent in the unspeakably degrading occupation of editing classics, befouling the fair margins of the fairest books with idle and superfluous annotation, and doing their utmost to give a lasting disgust of all that is beautiful. An abbey church turned to the base use of a stable or bakehouse is a sorry sight, but more pitiable still is a masterpiece spluttered over with the commentator's pen and his hideous mark C.F. For my part, I chose the glorious career of scholar in its ancient sense. I longed to possess encyclopedic learning, to grow old amongst books, to distill day by day and year after year the inmost sweetness of all worthy writings. I was not rich enough to collect a library, and I was therefore forced to betake myself to the reading room of the British Museum. O dim, far-lifted and mighty dome, Mecca of many minds, mausoleum of many hopes, sad house where all desires fail. For there men enter in with hearts uplifted and dreaming minds, seeing in those exalted stairs a ladder to fame, in that pompous portico the gate of knowledge, and going in find but vain vanity, and all but in vain. There, when the long streets are ringing, is silence; there eternal twilight and the odour of heaviness. But there the blood flows thin and cold, and the brain burns adust. There is the hunt of shadows, and the chase of embattled phantoms, a striving against ghosts, and a war that has no victory. O dome, tomb of the quick, surely in thy galleries, where no reverberant voice can call, sighs whisper ever, and muttering of dead hopes. And there men's souls mount like moths toward the flame, and fall scorched and blackened beneath thee, O dim, far-lifted and mighty dome. Bitterly do I now regret the day when I took my place at a desk for the first time and began my studies. I had not been an habitué of the place for many months when I became acquainted with a serene and benevolent gentleman, a man somewhat past middle age, who nearly always occupied a desk next to mine. In the reading room it takes little to make an acquaintance; a casual offer of assistance, a hint as to the search in the catalogue, and the ordinary politeness of men who constantly sit near each other. It was thus I came to know the man calling himself Dr. Lipsius. By degrees I grew to look for his presence, and to miss him when he was away, as was sometimes the case, and so a friendship sprang up between us. His immense range of learning was placed freely at my service. He would often astonish me by the way in which he would sketch out in a few minutes the bibliography of a given subject, and before long I had confided to him my ambitions. 'Ah,' he said, You should have been a German. I was like that myself when I was a boy. It is a wonderful resolve, an infinite career. I will know all things. Yes, it is a device indeed, but it means this: a life of labour without end, and a desire unsatisfied at last. The scholar has to die, and die saying, I know very little. Gradually, by speeches such as these, Lipsius seduced me. He would praise the career, and at the same time hint that it was as hopeless as the search for the philosopher's stone, and so by artful suggestions, insinuated with infinite address, he by degrees succeeded in undermining all my principles. After all, he used to say, the greatest of all sciences, the key to all knowledge, is the science and art of pleasure. Rabelais was perhaps the greatest of all encyclopedic scholars, and he, as you know, wrote the most remarkable book that has ever been written. And what does he teach men in this book? Surely the joy of living. I need not remind you of the words suppressed in most of the editions, the key of all the Rabelaisian mythology, of all the enigmas of his grand philosophy. Vivez joyeux. There you have all his learning. His work is the Institutes of Pleasure, as the fine art, the finest art there is, the art of all arts. Rabelais had all science, but he had all life too. And we have gone a long way since his time. You are enlightened, I think. You do not consider all the petty rules and by-laws that a corrupt society has made for its own selfish convenience as the immutable decrees of the Eternal. Such were the doctrines he preached, and it was by such insidious arguments, line upon line, here a little and there a little, that he at last succeeded in making me a man at war with the whole social system. I used to long for some opportunity to break the chains and to live a free life, to be my own rule and measure. I viewed existence with the eyes of a pagan, and Lipsius understood to perfection the art of stimulating the natural inclinations of a young man hitherto a hermit. As I gazed up at the great dome, I saw it flushed with the flames and colours of a world of enticement unknown to me. My imagination played me 1,000 wanton tricks, and the forbidden drew me as surely as a lodestone draws on iron. At last my resolution was taken, and I boldly asked Lipsius to be my guide. He told me to leave the museum at my usual hour, 4:30, to walk slowly along the northern pavement of Great Russell Street, and to wait at the corner of the street till I was addressed, and then to obey in all things the instructions of the person who came up to me. I carried out these directions, and stood at the corner, looking about me anxiously, my heart beating fast, and my breath coming in gasps. I waited there for some time, and had begun to fear I had been made the object of a joke, when I suddenly became conscious of a gentleman who was looking at me with evident amusement from the opposite pavement of Tottenham Court Road. He came over, and raising his hat, politely begged me to follow him, and I did so without a word, wondering where we were going, and what was to happen. I was taken to a house of quiet and respectable aspect in a street lying to the north of Oxford Street, and my guide rang the bell. A servant showed us into a large room, quietly furnished, on the ground floor. We sat there in silence for some time, and I noticed that the furniture, though unpretending, was extremely valuable. There were large oak presses, 2 bookcases of extreme elegance, and in one corner a carved chest which must have been medieval. Presently Dr. Lipsius came in, and welcomed me with his usual manner, and after some desultory conversation my guide left the room. Then an elderly man dropped in and began talking to Lipsius, and from their conversation I understood that my friend was a dealer in antiques. They spoke of the Hittite seal, and of the prospects of further discoveries, and later, when 2 or 3 more persons joined us, there was an argument as to the possibility of a systematic exploration of the pre-Celtic monuments in England. I was in fact present at an archaeological reception of an informal kind, and at 9 o'clock, when the antiquaries were gone, I stared at Lipsius in a manner that showed I was puzzled, and sought an explanation. "Now," he said, "we will go upstairs." As we passed up the stairs, Lipsius lighting the way with a hand lamp, I heard the sound of a jarring lock, and bolts and bars shot on at the front door. My guide drew back a baize door, and we went down a passage, and I began to hear odd sounds, a noise of curious mirth. Then he pushed me through a second door, and my initiation began. I cannot write down what I witnessed that night. I cannot bear to recall what went on in those secret rooms, fast shuttered and curtained, so that no light should escape into the quiet street. They gave me red wine to drink, and a woman told me as I sipped it that it was wine of the red jar that Avalonius had made. Another asked how I liked the wine of the fauns, and I heard a dozen fantastic names, while the stuff boiled in my veins, and stirred, I think, something that had slept within me from the moment I was born. It seemed as if my self-consciousness deserted me. I was no longer a thinking agent, but at once subject and object. I mingled in the horrible sport, and watched the mystery of the Greek groves and fountains enacted before me, saw the reeling dance, and heard the music calling as I sat beside my mate. And yet I was outside it all, and viewed my own part as an idle spectator. Thus with strange rites they made me drink the cup, and when I woke up in the morning I was one of them, and had sworn to be faithful. At first I was shown the enticing side of things. I was bidden to enjoy myself and care for nothing but pleasure, and Lipsius himself indicated to me as the acutest enjoyment the spectacle of the terrors of the unfortunate persons who were from time to time decoyed into the evil house. But after a time it was pointed out to me that I must take my share in the work, and so I found myself compelled to be in my turn a seducer, and thus it is on my conscience that I have led many to the depths of the pit. One day Lipsius summoned me to his private room, and told me that he had a difficult task to give me. He unlocked a drawer and gave me a sheet of typewritten paper, and bade me read it. It was without place, or date, or signature, and ran as follows: Mr James Headley, FSA, will receive from his agent in Armenia, on the 12th instant, a unique coin, the gold Tiberius. It bears on the reverse a faun with the legend Victoria. It is believed that this coin is of immense value. Mr Headley will come up to town to show the coin to his friend Professor Memis of Cheney's Street, Oxford Street, on some date between the 13th and the 18th. Dr Lipsius chuckled at my face of blank surprise when I laid down this singular communication. "You will have a good chance of showing your discretion," he said. "This is not a common case. It requires great management and infinite tact. I am sure I wish I had a Panurge in my service, but we will see what you can do." "But it is not a joke?" I asked him. "How can you know, or rather, how can this correspondent of yours know that a coin has been dispatched from Armenia to Mr Headley, and how is it possible to fix the period in which Mr Headley will take it into his head to come up to town? It seems to me a lot of guesswork." "My dear Mr Walters," he replied, "we do not deal in guesswork here. It would bore you if I went into all these little details, the cogs and the wheels, if I must say so, which move the machine. Don't you think it is much more amusing to sit in front of the house and be astonished than to be behind the scenes and see the mechanism? Better tremble at the thunder, believe me, than see the man rolling the cannonball. But after all, you need not bother about the how and why. You have your share to do. Of course I shall give you full instructions, but a great deal depends on the way the thing is carried out. I have often heard very young men maintain that style is everything in literature, and I can assure you that the same maxim holds good in our far more delicate profession. With us style is absolutely everything, and that is why we have friends like yourself.' I went away in some perturbation. He had no doubt designedly left everything in mystery, and I did not know what part I should have to play, though I had assisted at scenes of hideous revelry. I was not yet dead to all echo of human feeling, and I trembled lest I should receive the order to be Mr. Headley's executioner. End of Part 1 of History of the Young Man with Spectacles.